Thank you very much. I will be sharing a post-mortem of a game I just finished with my group mates. None of them were able to show up today because of our class schedules. I was the only one that did not have a class at this time, so I'll be presenting on their behalf. Okay, that's a bit of a spoiler. So I would like to present the game I've been working on for the past month with my teammates. It's called Loch Ness Escape. These are the roles that me and my teammates had. I took on the lead of lead producer and project manager. This was a small team of 4 people, and we did this for our intro to computer gaming course. Our initial concept behind Loch Ness Escape was to make a 2D platformer in Unity about the Loch Ness Monster trying to escape a prison full of mythical creatures, such as Bigfoot and Yeti and a bunch of other, like a unicorn. One of my teammates suggested a narwhal at one point, and we wanted this game to be a combination of Space Invaders, Nyan Cat, and the Google Dino game, because we wanted it to be the most chaotic game imaginable, which was a little ambitious for us, I won't deny. So what went right? We had a lot of, I won't deny this, we've had a lot of struggles throughout the development of our game, but what we did was throughout the development of Loch Ness Escape, we could have basically scrapped the entire idea and started completely over. But what we did instead of scrapping our idea is we decided to change how we were developing our game instead of what we were developing. And in the end, for our project, this was the right decision because it saved us a lot of time and energy that would have been spent redoing what we already had completed. And something that my group is very proud of is the fact that we have a functioning game. We all were taking a 15 credit course load, I believe, during this past term, and this project was our final project for our class. And it seems so simple, but this was a huge challenge for all of us to overcome. And I will explain why we had a lot of issues on the next slide, but being able to have our current functioning game right now to present with you all today is a real huge accomplishment for my team. So what went wrong? The first thing I'd like to talk about is inexperience within our team. One of our greatest weaknesses in our team was the fact that none of us had experience using Unity or felt comfortable enough to use Unity in order to create our game. However, at the beginning of our production, we decided that Unity was going to be our platform that we primarily used. Around halfway through the production of this game, we were really far behind schedule and we were missing a lot of really important deadlines. And so we needed to change which platform we were using. Another issue for us was scheduling. Scheduling in our team was very difficult because we all had insane class schedules and one of our teammates had a 13-hour time difference. So being able to meet up as a group with all 4 of us was something that was challenging, as well as the fact that between not the member who had the 13-hour time difference, but the other 3 members all had very conflicting schedules. So sometimes there would only be 2 people in a meeting instead of our typical 4. And so there were also a bunch of tech issues. On my part, my Drexel account wouldn't let me share anything from my personal workspace, and I had our game doc, which is what we were using to reference everything off of. So it was really hard for me to communicate with my teammates what our game doc had on it and what we needed to do. And that was something that was really a big struggle and a big obstacle to overcome, but we ended up doing it. So some things that changed about the production is the platform we used. In the middle of the production, we decided to change our main platform from using Unity to Twine, which we used for about 4 days. And then we changed to Construct 3, which was a lot less code heavy for our team because none of us know, I believe it is C# or C++. None of us know either program. So using Construct 3 was a lot easier for us to do. And we also changed the scope of our game. we had a lot of chaotic elements in the first part of our production that we had ideas for, and we had to scrap a lot of them, such as obstacles. But because we fell behind schedule and we needed to be able to produce something, we cut back on a lot of our original ideas. So what we learned, I can speak for myself. I personally can't speak for my teammates, but I personally learned a lot about what it means to be a project manager and a producer. So for me personally, I learned a lot about what it means to lead a team. I previously had experience in schedule making and assigning deadlines, but not really the communication aspect of being a project manager or a producer. And that's something that's so important in being that role. In being a project manager and a producer, you have to be able to work with what people already know, what people are comfortable with, and work to other people's strengths instead of what we should be doing or what the typical way of developing a game is. Because at the beginning, early phases of the project, we wanted to work in Unity. And that was something I personally advocated for. And that was a mistake on my part because none of us felt comfortable using Unity, even though that's what I believe we should be using. So that caused a lot of time that we could have had spending creating a bigger, a more developed game than what we have today, which I still am very proud of. But we could have had more in it, and we could have focused more time on that instead of what we have today. And that's something I personally learned from. My group mates learned other things. We discussed this yesterday. Two of them mentioned how they learned, even though we were assigned a role, they said that they learned about that you have to do more than just your role, more than just what you're assigned in a team, especially as small as our team of only 4 people. And that was what they said. Now I'm going to show off Loch Ness Escape. Okay, I'm going to run the game. So it's powering up. And so here's our little Loch Ness monster. You can press spacebar or left click in order to have it bounce. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to have the Loch Ness monster not fall into one of the holes. And if it does fall or gets trapped, it starts over. And this is the game we have. I'm gonna stop sharing and take any questions. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Serena, because I think that's a very different perspective from a lot of what we've heard tonight, which we've from people who have been, interested in game development for a very long time and have been doing a lot of production for. From what you've told us, a lot of the people on your team had no experience with game production. This is kind of a first time, and which requires a lot of learning, but also a lot of pitfalls and mistakes. So Rob has a question that also kind of combines into the question I was prepping too, which asking about how much dev time was allowed for this project that you did from start to finish. And kind of my follow-up tie-in to that is the version that you're showing today. You said you had a lot of false starts, and then you eventually, found Construct 2. What was the time frame from Construct 2 or Construct 3 to what we're seeing today? So project from start to your beginning, when you first started this project to the end, versus the time developing the Construct 3 version.
So we had about 5 weeks, I want to say, between the start of our project and where we were yesterday when we had to turn in our final project. So it was about 5 weeks. We didn't really start talking till 1 week after the final project was really assigned, however. I think that was kind of a weakness, I will admit, to our team, because we didn't meet up right after our class. What we did is we waited a week until we started discussing what we wanted our game to be. So in actual dev production, probably on the lower end of 5 weeks. So probably around 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks for the actual dev time. And from when we started using Construct 3, we started about 2 weeks, a week and a half in till when it was finally due. So it took us a while to actually make that jump and make that step. However, a lot of are a lot of what we had already had. So our main idea, our game doc, the image of the Loch Ness monster, the pixel art, that was already created and done. And there was a 4-day time period in between when we were working in Unity and when we were working in Construct 3 where we were working on a Twine project. So we actually do have some Twine assets and a Twine save version of this game that we ended up scrapping completely.
Right. Awesome. RJ is asking in the Q&A, how did you find the team member who's in a different time zone? So I know that you mentioned this is a student project, so I imagine they were part of your class. So I'll like kind of add to that question really to do to say, could you talk a little bit more, especially because you were talking about acting as a producer in this role, kind of facilitating the communication between someone who has such a different time difference from the rest of your class.
Yeah, it was. I won't lie, it was quite difficult when it came to scheduling, and that person missed probably the most meetings. However, that they did show up to as many meetings as they could go to, and it was difficult. However, we messaged through Discord. That was our main stream of communication throughout the entire project. During this class that we had to create a game beforehand as well. So what we did is we also, when creating our first game, I created a Discord for everyone to hop in and get comfortable using. So we already had that Discord channel set up just for the 4 of us. So when starting our actual development, it was quite easy for us to just kind of hop right in. And whenever it was just a small little task where he would ask, hey, because he would miss some of our meetings, it would be harder for us to remember, oh, we need to message him. So I would take the responsibility of messaging him saying, hey, we're scrapping the Twine project. We're using Construct 3. Don't worry about what you've had. He did a lot of work in Twine and did a majority of what we ended up scrapping from the Twine project. And what he had was good, but what our team had decided without, it was hard to get his ideas and concepts in, but when we assigned him work to do, and basically I would send him a message and within like a couple of hours, he'd be like, okay, I got this, I can do this. So it was difficult, but we made it work the best we could.
Very cool. Jason asks in the chat, how did the Twine version that you were working on, that you took the 4 days, how did that compare to the Unity and Construct version? Because you did mention that it was based on the similar like theme of the project, despite being one being a runner.
So what we were doing is we were actually changing on making it a platformer to a story-based game, where it was kind of a choose your own adventure story. So you'd be playing as one of 3 characters. And what you would do is throughout the story, you would encounter obstacles. So you'd run into a guard and you'd have to find a way to escape the guard. And so what you'd have to do is you'd have to kind of click your way out of it, which is very different from our initial concept. And it was a lot of extra story-based telling, which I personally was comfortable with. However, as a team, we decided that was a lot of extra work. And one of my teammates found Construct 3 and decided we can just move over to that, which is why it kind of took 4 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so as kind of a follow-up question, and I know you can only speak somewhat to this, not being the main programmer on the project, but firstly, Scott says, I think what your team accomplished is wonderful despite all the setbacks, especially since you only had the 1 month. What aspects of Construct 3 made it easier for your team rather than Unity? This is something that Scott has not used before.
So I can't speak too much on this because this wasn't something I worked a lot in. However, a lot of our development, so whenever we did meet in person, we would screen share what we have. And so even though I wasn't a coder, our coder would screen share her code. It was very much a visual based programming language. So it was very easy to understand, where it's similar to Twine, but it's not an HTML based program, but it's similar to, you have these boxes and you connect them if you wanted to do something, if you want the code to work. So it was much more intuitive for our coder to use. And so it was a much easier adjustment. And it wasn't one of those main programming languages that people use, such as Python, C Sharp, C++. It was very construct 3 based, which made it a lot easier for for our programmer to use.
And just for context, for those out there who have not heard of these names, so Twine is typically a narrative-based platform using HTML5 files to make choose-your-own-adventure style narrative games. At least that's its intended purpose, because it's very freeform and open source. People do crazy. I mean, they're usually narrative games, but they do very different, very experimental types of projects in Twine. Whereas Construct 3 is a visual coding system for a visual coding game engine that mostly uses drag and drop code, but is more code than, say, Game Maker, which also has a drag and drop system that's a lot more visual. Whereas Construct, you were dragging and dropping things such as for each loops and if then statements and things of that nature. I have used Construct a little bit, but only the original version. I have not touched it since the Construct 1, so it's been a minute. I have one question, a last question, unless other folks want to queue up stuff in the Q&A, which is, I want to know if you could speak a little bit more about your prior experience managing and scheduling projects, which you had mentioned you had done prior to this, versus the role of producing for a team. Talk a little bit more about what you did prior and what the differences were, and what the differences between what you have done in the past versus working on a team in a producer role, which is a very challenging type of role.
So previously, I had taken a internship for 6 months working for a doctor's office where me and one of my coworkers were developing a game. And during this time, my employer asked us what we were interested in, and I mentioned I was interested in project management. So what I was doing was, under him, I did a lot of project management studies and studying basic ideas and philosophies and how to practice that in person. And at the end of my internship, we had just started implementing that within the development of the game that he was working on, but I wasn't leading anyone or leading any sort of project in that, because I still had a boss and I had a coworker, and there was a hierarchy, and I was basically just doing a lot more of the art features of that game, where a lot of the project management I was learning was a lot less in practice use. So hopping onto this project, I had a lot of ideas of how to create a game doc. I knew how to use how to use a Kanban board from my previous work experience, but I'd never worked in a group larger than 2 other people, and in this case there were 3 other people who had various different experiences from myself, and we didn't have a lot of time to kind of state what we really wanted to do and what we could do. So it was a lot more need to communicate, as well as the fact where in a work day, oh, we all have a designated 8 to 5 work schedule. So I can just message them anytime throughout the day. Where working with other students and other peers of mine, our schedules are so insane and crazy. It was a lot harder for that communication. But also, because I hadn't known them all that well, it was harder for me as a leader and as a producer to accommodate to their needs, which is something I want to grow as in a producer and project manager role.
Cool. I'm going to give one more minute or so to see if anyone has any final questions for Serena. So I do want to say that it is a common refrain that in the game industry that every shipped game is a minor miracle. So and in light of that, I agree 100% with what Scott did. The fact that your team all came together in that final 2 weeks and were able to have something at the finish line, I think is a huge accomplishment, especially considering that this was your first time for a lot of you tackling a project like this. So I just want to say one more time, good job, and thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Like Rob says in the chat, it's great to share a post-mortem here because we all have the stories of the things that go sideways. It's so common. So thank you once again so much for sharing your story with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.